Hi everyone, Andrew here again. It's time for another series review. This time we'll be doing the Star Shard Chronicles, or as I always call it, the Scorpion Shards, because that's the name of the first book. One of the things I will say about this series before I even start out, I have two very different covers between book one, which is really bizarre looking. What in the heck are you looking at? Versus this, which all three roughly look like this. Just one person and a weird effect on their body. It's like, yeah. Like, I much prefer the older cover, which is just this bizarre, what in the world am I looking at thing. Anyway, I want to give a special shout out to Mom Duda, who not only recommended this series to me, but she actually gave me the first book, which is why this one's radically different than others. So the book starts out, the first one, Scorpion Shard book, starts out with our main protagonist, Dylan. And Dylan is filled by this desire, this thing inside him that demands that he cause destruction. So the start of the book is Dylan basically pushing a piano out a window and causing it to crash down streets. This event nearly runs into a woman named Deanna, who's been going to therapy for months because she has insane phobia. She's just afraid of everything, and it crushes her life. And she and Dylan basically crash into each other, and something happens. There's a weird spark, a weird connection, and they end up running away from the cops together and going on the run. Across the U.S. in the South, we come across Winston. Winston is a 16-year-old, but he has been aging backwards for the last few years and is now in the body of an 8-year-old. And one night he goes out into the wilderness because he has this weird feeling, this weird pull that is pulling him westward. And outside his house, he runs into this girl named Tori. And Tori is just sickly. She's covered in disease and sores, and she's just like the most disgusting, sickly person you've ever seen. And they see a connection between each other. They both have similar things, and there's this weird energy between them. And they realize that they need to go out and go west and find out what's been pulling them. So they leave out together. In the Northeast, there is another boy named Michael who's been having a lot of troubles lately. Every time he speaks to a girl, any girl, doesn't matter who, she's instantly in love with him, enthralled by him, and wants to have sex with him. Doesn't sound too bad, but the major problem, and it's like any time that a boy hears him, they become filled with rage, and they try to basically, they beat the crap out of him and try to kill him. And ends up happening that Michael is being lectured to by a teacher, and he tries not to say anything. The teacher makes him speak, and this just makes him angry and angrier. So eventually gets to the point where he's trying to just murder Michael. And while running away, Michael runs into Loudries. Now, Loudries she's described as so overweight, she has her own gravity. So basically, like, she is super big. She should not be able to type of walk, but she's not she's not fat normally. She doesn't eat much. She's no reason she'd be that bad, but she is. So the teacher tries to hit her to get to Michael, and it reflects, and he ends up hitting and being unable to hurt either of them. So Loudries and Michaels decide they are going to go off in the west, go and find where the source that's pulling them. And during the journey during all this, they all figure out that they've been born in the same time. They were all born directly at the same time that a star went supernova, specifically the Scorpion star, and discover that that the soul of that star split into 6 parts and now resides within them, and that gives them special abilities. The problem is that on top of that, they are also infected by parasites that are not only warping their powers, but are also slowly killing them. And they have to find a way to remove the parasites, or they will all die very painful deaths. So Loudries, Michael, Winston, and Tori end up meeting up and discover that they are immune to each other's abilities. So, like, Michael can talk to the girls, and they don't end up trying to sleep with him, type of thing. So they're all not as affected by each other as the extremes of the others are. And Dylan, during this time, has been feeding his parasite more and more, and discovers that he not only can just destroy objects, he can also destroy people, that there are patterns, and if he looks at them, he can figure out just the right thing to do, just the right thing to say, to destroy a human being. With each of the passing days, all of the shards have been growing weaker and weaker. Winston is now in the body of a 4-year-old. Loudries is too big to even really walk or stand, and Loudries just kind of, like, at a certain point, just kind of disappears, and they, like, where is she? And they find her in this abandoned building set up for destruction, and she's just like, I'm just gonna stay here and wait it out. And they all, with the exception of Winston, who still feels he needs to go do stuff, still feels he needs to fight, he goes off and they stay there just to wait for the end. Unbeknownst to them, that Dylan had talked to the person in charge of the explosion and moved up the time. So now the building explodes with them in it, but they all manage to survive. And they also notice that something's different, that they're all lighter, that they're all not weighed down by their... And they figure out that because the parasites thought they were dead, or they were certain that the people were going to die, the parasites abandoned the bodies and returned to their own dimension. Meanwhile, Dylan has also gone into this really small town and has driven, literally with a single act, drove every single person in the town insane, and led to multiple deaths. And Deanna can't take this anymore, and she takes off into the woods and is nearly killed by one of the crazed town folks, causing her demon to leave her as well. Deanna ends up meeting up with the other 4 shards, and they all realize that they have real power that is different from when they were tainted by the parasites. Winston can make plants grow, Michael controls the weather, Loudries can control living things, Tori can clean anything. Basically, she's a hospital room. She makes it makes everything sterile in that sense. And Deanna has the ability to instill unwavering faith. Yeah, this is like the most hodgepodge of powers. It's like, okay, I can make plants grow. That's normal. I can control the weather. Okay, Storm. I can control living things. Okay, Professor X. And then it's like, I can clean anything, and I can instill faith. And you're like, those sound like the lamest powers. What are you supposed to do with that? So, they now know that Dylan has this plan to destroy the world. And they have to catch him and stop him from doing so. So they chase after Dylan, and when they catch him, Winston pulls out a gun and shoots him, and pulls the trigger and shoots him in the head. Parasite flees his body and enters a rift between our universe, and it opens up a rift between our universe and theirs, and all of the shards are dragged in. Dylan awakes in the other dimension, believing he'd been shot, but there are only 3 rounds in the 6th round revolver, and one had been blank, and it just scared the piss out of it. So now they have to destroy the parasites before they have the chance to cause any more harm, as well as find a way back into their own world. And that's where I'm going to leave book 1 ended off. That's about 80-90% of the plot. I'm going to go straight into Thief of Souls. So, Thief of Souls starts with Prometheus from Greek mythology, who is tied to a rock and has a raven eat out his innards every day for his crimes. But we find out that this Prometheus is a little different. This Prometheus was betrayed by Star Shards, who he had taught to control the powers. The Star Shards became the Greek gods and ruled over humanity and imprisoned the one person that they saw as a threat. But Prometheus, even though they left him in this, doesn't die. His human body does not perish, and he breaks out of his imprisonment and proceeds to kill each and every single one of them one by one. And then he sinks their kingdom into the sea. But he, at that time, is far too weak to escape the destruction, to leave his body, or to do anything, so he just disappears into the sea. So, we cut ahead in time to the modern era, where a year has passed since the battle against the parasites, and Dylan has been working hard to restore sanity to the town that he mentally destroyed. We start the story off, that part of it, with him digging up the remains of a daughter of one of the townsfolk. We find that Dylan has developed the power to see and manipulate patterns. So he knows what people can do, what the paths they'll take are, how people will react, but he can also see the patterns in a person's body and the soul and be able to coax them back into the living world. So he revives the dead daughter and returns her to the family. He asks the family not to tell anyone about this, and as he'd asked all the other families, but it doesn't really work that way. The cops end up chasing after him and capture him. He manages to escape, but gets shot and falls into a river. Downriver, he is picked up by the villagers he's healed, who now see him as a god and have started basically a cult around him. Dylan is filled with this feeling of unease, this feeling that something horrible is going on, something happening, so he sends out the call to the shards to rejoin him. Doing this, however, awakens Prometheus, who latches onto the nearest living thing, which is a fish, and travels upstream, and travels towards Dylan. So the other shards, with the exception of Deanna, who is still trapped in the parasite's dimension, all have returned home and are all their powers have grown to the point that they have a field around them that's under their influence that is affected by it. So it's like Tori has gone to live in a bad side of Miami, a very dangerous side, but when we see her now, that side is squeaky clean. Not just the town, but the people themselves. The story starts with her dropping an item and the shop owner freaking out that she made a mess. So it's like she's not only changed the town, she's changed the way people think. Her boyfriend that she currently had was a gangbanger when she met him, and he was dark and dangerous, and now he doesn't want to kiss her or touch her because it's too illicit, it's too wrong, it's too dirty type of thing. So it's, yeah. I'm gonna pause for a second. This part of this book terrified me. I'm the kind of person that I read X-Men and I read these superhero stories and these people with bizarre powers, and usually I'm fine with it. There's not many that I can think of where I had a reaction like, oh god, I can understand why the government would want to destroy them or capture them. I can usually be like, no, they're mostly good. The fact that these people have extreme powers that work not just on themselves but on a radius of people, and that they do it unconscionably, that it's just their mere presence causes people to have complete mental changes That's what terrified me. Because it's dangerous enough when you have Cyclops who can, if he loses his glasses, will cause damage, but it's like he has a way to control it, he has a method to control this. This is literally just, I walk into a town and everyone's mentally shifts. And that's, I can see that being dangerous. Anyway, so, Tori decide, like, I need to go west, I need to go find Dylan. Winston has returned home as well, but now his home is overgrown with wild plants. He's also keeps growing taller dramatically, so everything around him is just shooting up and growing faster and faster. Loudries has lost all the weight. She's now super skinny, and has gained the ability to control a good-sized group of people. And she's able to control them at almost a molecular level. She can literally change the way people's bodies digest food and do things. So she's like made it so her body works well enough that if she wanted to, she could eat whatever she wanted and would never gain weight. And if a girl's been particularly crude to her, she can do the reverse, where the girl can be as healthy as possible and still gaining weight. Yeah. Loudries during this time has fallen more and more in love with Michael, because they were so close during the first book that he was the only person who could stand to look at her and really liked her when she was fat and the way she used to be. But Michaels has moved out to California with his dad, leaving her there. So she feels the call, and she's like, I'm gonna go to Michael, and we're gonna leave together because I know he'll wait for me. Michael has been this time frame trying to be a perfectly normal boy, but has also developed, on top of the ability to control the weather, the ability to meddle with the way people think and feel, so he can make people into pure optimists or change the way they react to certain things. He befriended a boy named Greg, and they're running buddies together, and Michael, having felt the call, is trying to ignore it, doesn't want to deal with it, doesn't want to be put back in that situation, and ends up revealing to Greg that he has the power to control weather. A large number of sea creatures end up washing up on the shore, and Greg's instantly like, did you do this? And Michael's like, no, I did not. And he knows it's like the ridiculously large number of animals just committing suicide. And he knows that I can't ignore the call, that this is something important, that I have to go. And Loudry shows up, and he and her leave together, as well as Greg, who insists on going along as well. During all this time, during the unleash of the call, Pulse went out in the world and awoken Prometheus. And he now knows that there are other Star Shards that may or may not be more powerful. He is able to latch his soul, his being, onto other creatures. So he travels from the ocean into wolves and ends up in Arizona, where he runs into a pair of conjoined fraternal twins, one male, one female. And he offers them anything of their heart's desire, and they agree, and so he takes over their body, fusing the two into one being that is both male and female at the same time, and starts to call himself Okoye. I'm pretty certain that's how you say it. It was Okoya. So, anyway, Okoye ends up joining with Tori and Winston, who have gotten together and are traveling. And we start to see that there's something a little bit fundamentally wrong with each of the shards. They're all missing something. Like, Loudry's is just missing a feeling of fullness, a feeling of belonging. Tori has become a germaphobe, can't help but feel dirty. Winston just kind of feels lost, and Michael can't feel emotions. He's basically just kind of, especially cannot feel love or affection of any sort. Okay, So, Tori and Winston are traveling with Okoye. Meanwhile, Michael, Loudries, and Greg are traveling via boat up the west coast. Michael's basically during a discussion and talking about how how Loudries cares for Michael, but Michael knows he can't return those feelings. Greg kisses him, which causes Michael to freak out, ends up creating a hurricane, and crashes the boat onto the Pacific Coast Highway, instantly killing Greg. Meanwhile, Dylan's people have taken over the Hearst Castle, which I'd never heard of until about 5 months ago when my grandparents went and visited, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you should go visit it. It's a California landmark." I'm like, okay. Anyway, Hearst Castle has been taken over by Dylan's followers, and they are bringing in hundreds of people a day to be healed by Dylan. But Dylan's power only works so far. He can't regrow limbs. He can't do certain other powers. And so the first people to show up are Winston and Tori. And Winston is using, and Tori decide to help him. And so Winston's growing limbs from people that are amputees or missing pieces. And Tori is actually removing disease and sterilizing the entire space at the same time. And Okoye's in the back watching all of this with sadistic awe. I'm going to go with that, yeah. So, Michael and Loudry show up with Greg's body in the back, which Dylan revives, and Greg decides he's going to start filming all of these miracles that the shards are doing, all these powers and things. So, Dylan informs them the reason he's calling is that he had a feeling, I foresaw a future where, the world was going to end up being destroyed and that they had to be together to stop it, but he didn't know what this was. The fact that he doesn't know kind of disillusions kind of everyone, so they all kind of go off into their own sections of the castle, and Okoye visits each and every single one of them and gives them different gifts. And upon receiving the gifts, they start to drift apart from each other, and they all start to think of themselves only and start visioning themselves as gods, as people worthy of all this worship that they are receiving. And Dylan was the hardest one to crack, but eventually Okoye manages to get in there. And during this time, Okoye's been working in the background, and he has basically taken over controlling all the middle management stuff, and has all of the people that are following kind of visit him periodically, and they are all coming out differently because he is eating their souls. So they still act the same, but there's no life in their eyes. They're missing something. AKA they're missing their souls. And because of Okoye's, also during this time, Michael has visited Greg in the night, and figures out that someone in the beginning of the book that had asked him to reprogram his son to no longer be gay was Greg's dad. And he comes to the conclusion that that this might be the best thing for them all, is for him to reprogram Greg to not be gay. So he does that. Meanwhile, Dylan because of Okoye's influence, now believes that he has to save the world by making himself the leader of the world. And to do so, he has to shatter the world as we know it. And he ends up learning this ability that allows him for things to remain in their form, even if the thing holding it is shattered. So he proves to do this first by breaking a glass and having the water just stay there floating, and then proceeds to shatter the part of the Hearst Castle apart, where the pool is, leaving the pool floating in midair in its original shape, unaffected. So the Star Shards and their followers travel to Vegas, where Dylan makes all of the roulette wheels land sequentially, like first 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, on and on. It then proceeds to shatter the Mirage's fish tank and keeping all the fish in, and escapes. They head out into the desert, and Dylan knows that what he needs to do. He knows that he has to destroy the Hoover Dam, but hold the water intact. And this will show the world that he is the one who's supposed to be in charge. But he has this moment of distrust towards Okoye, and comes across Greg, who has been acting really twitchy and odd for the last few days. I wonder why. And he asks Greg to spy on Okoye. Michael and Tori wake up in the middle of the night and see Greg being chased off by Okoye. They proceed to chase after them, and they end up being trapped inside the dam. And they manage to get Greg to safety, but Dylan and Michael and Tori are stuck. Dylan goes out and plants a single stone into the dam, walking away knowing that this would cause the shattering of the dam. He meets up with the others, asking where Michael and Tori are. Koya says that they've just left in the night, and Winston and Loudries are unaffected by this, which causes Dylan to realize that something's really wrong. And eventually gets them to the side, and they figure out that these gifts that Okoye has given them have been filling in the empty space in themselves that the parasites had been in, that the parts that felt off. And the reason the gifts have been doing that is because they've been basically the shards have been eating the human souls of their followers. Yeah. And they turn on Okoye, but he informs them that it's already too late. The dam is going to break regardless of whether or not he's there, which leaves them with only two options. Either Dylan holds the water back, fulfilling Okoye's plan and destroying the world, or he does nothing, and the water flows down into Arizona and kills hundreds of thousands. And what will Dylan do? And I will not say, because I don't want to reveal that. That I will say the last little arc of this book is the best part of the book. The whole beginning is a little muddy, but we move on to the third one, the Shattered Sky, or just Shattered Sky. Yeah. So, Shattered Sky takes place another year after Thief of Souls. Dylan has been captured by the U.S. military, and basically he let himself get captured for reasons that aren't ever really explained. They're kind of explained, but I don't fully know. So, and Dylan, being the person that he is and having the powers that affect everything around him, knows, like, you can't handcuff me, you can't lock me in a cell, I can break out of those without even having to try. There's nothing you can do. So, enter Elon Tesik, who is a Jewish billionaire, and he was contracted by the government to build Dylan's prison. And he succeeds. Oh yeah. He puts him in a big, giant cell that has no windows, no access to the outside world, and has a lock that changes so fast and so frequently, and is based specifically on Dylan's ability, that it's impossible for Dylan to break it. And the only way in and out is through a metal a metal chair that will close in around him and prevent. Basically, will close everything but like his nose and mouth hole a little bit, and you can sort of see his eyes, but he can't really do anything. He can't really say anything, and the military's been using his powers to heal basically heal sick politicians, heal sick rulers, doing anything to enforce the America's power type of thing, and political favors and things like that. So basically, using a god to do stupid things. Winston is knows something is going on. Has been trying to track down Laudries, who left before the end of the second book and has just been off on her own. She figures out that she's been basically living on a cruise ship or a yacht. I think it's a yacht, and has basically will come into port, get everything that she needs, and leave, and no one can really track her. Winston manages to find information about the ship, where it is, goes to visit her. She has complete control over the entire crew, and has her own gaggle of boys who all sort of look like Michael, fanning her and taking care of her, and she's just like, I'm not dealing with any of this bullshit. I'm at peace. I'm fine. I'm happy. I'm not getting involved with the world. Screw the world. And has Winston thrown from the boat and leaves. So Winston is just kind of, Winston goes to talk to Greg, and they go and visit Michael's grave because him and Tori did not make it out of the dam before the collapse. And it's like, now it's a thing of going, we finally got his remains, we finally know where he is, and Dylan's gone, and we have no idea where Dylan is to be able to bring him back. So Winston just kind of goes into town and is trying to figure things out, make some money. Him and Dylan and Laudries all feel this pulse. And it's not the same as when they were called. It's this danger in the air, this thing that something dark is coming, something evil is coming. And in Nevada, a dentist is visited by these three beings and tells them, we are angels, we are here to help. We would like to help you get your revenge on Dylan, because Dylan had revived his wife and son, but then had also let them die during the events of the Hoover Dam. The Hoover Dam. So he wants revenge on Dylan for that, and they're like, we need you to make certain that the shards cannot be revived. We must have them be broken. We must have them be apart. They're the only things that will prevent our coming. So he goes and tries to destroy Michael's remains, but Greg gets in the way, is able to fight him off, basically ends up taking a starter pistol from his track team and shoves it in the guy's eye, and turns it on, and takes Michael's remains and leaves with them and meets up with Winston, and they are like, we have to go and find Tori's remains. We have to keep Tori safe. Tori has basically, Tori's body did show up, but it showed up under another person's name. It showed up under her real name versus her father, versus the name that she'd been given, which was like her mother's last name. So she's at home in Miami, and the dentist finds her and grabs the remains, and basically they run into each other at the airport. So the dentist runs into Winston and Greg, and he's basically been putting off little parts of Tori throughout. Basically, he flushed part of her down the toilet. It's like, if I separate enough of her, we won't be in danger. They end up on the same flight, and they go to deal with him. The dentist gets up, runs to the emergency doors, opens the door, and gets sucked out. And his last effort before he dies is he opens up the lid, and Tori's ashes spread into the wind. During all of this, Dylan has been basically just still being used, but has managed to get to a agreement or a balance where they will let him eat with another human being, provided he stays in the chair and the person feeds him. The person given the job of doing that is Maddie, who is a military sergeant, and she ends up developing very strong feelings for Dylan, and Dylan does his little magic trick where he basically says a set of lines that fill her with completion, where it's like the thing that has been holding her back, the thing that has made her be something of a tart, where she was sleeping around for a while and never really could do relationships, is now done. She's no longer affected by it. And so she's developed very strong feelings for Dylan. Tessic has his own plans for Dylan and informs Dylan that there is a little window of opportunity for his escape, that he hadn't set up the computers to acknowledge the existence of daylight savings time. So when it hit daylight savings time in 3 days' time, the computer would be stuck on one number for the total of an hour. And he had that time to escape. So Dylan manages to break the lock and escapes and runs out and is getting chased and basically instantly getting caught and chased, and runs straight into Maddie, who then proceeds to shoot him in the face. And unlike the first book, where it was blank, it's like, no, she shot him in the face, but she shot him this way. So she shot him in the mouth and basically dragged his remains into a truck, and right before that, Dylan whispers in the general's ear that they know what you did and you're going to pay. So basically shatters the general, and he goes and himself. So they manage to escape, and Dylan awakes having healed from the damage, but he still has a big scar across his face because he can't regrow that kind of tissue, and he can't regrow the missing teeth. So she's like, "Oh God, I just damaged the face of a god. I just offended the face of the generation." And he's like, "No, I'm super happy to not be there anymore." And they end up, and he super cares about her, and they have a relationship of a sexual variety. Let's go with that. Meanwhile, Loudries was in Panama, in the Panama Canal, heading to the other side, and ends up running into these three beings who are possessing the bodies of an old man and his ugly daughter and their grandson. And the grandson. And they tell him, "Oh, it's like, Loudries, we are angels. We're here to make the world a better place, and it's your job to serve us." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm not doing that." And they end up saying stuff to her and end up telling her, and it just kind of breaks her will. She's like, there's no afterlife, there's nothing else after this, there's just no point. So she ends up teaming with them, and they have plans with her to help bring about the end of the world. And so Dylan ends up with Tessic, and Tessic finds them and brings them to his house. And Dylan is like in awe of this place, because not just because it's pretty, but because of the way it's set up and the way that it's built with these walls and these soundproofing. He doesn't have the pattern onslaught that he'd been suffering from since leaving the cage. And all of their powers not only have, since the arrival of the three angels, have not only intensified, they've grown much larger, and they basically are firing out of control. Like, when it hit Dylan, he ended up reviving a cemetery full of people. And they had to take down all of them before taking him over to Tessic. He manages to find Winston and Greg, and they bring back Michael and tell him, like, oh yeah, a year has passed, and he's like, I can't deal with this right now. And Tessic is like, I have plans for you. We have this thing. It has to be done. I know this is what you're here for. And I'm going to say now that Tessic is a very strong faith Jewish billionaire, and he believes that Dylan was sent by God to do specific work, and makes an error of, oh, you can leave anytime you want if you disagree. I'm not here to control you. That's not what this is. And Winston's like, I don't believe you for a second. So he and Michael leave, along with Greg. And meanwhile, Maddie's been stuck in this thing where it's like, Dylan doesn't need her anymore, and she's just kind of lost everything. So she's caught in this realm between wanting to be with Dylan, wanting to be what he needs, but also not knowing that she never can be, because she can't be Deanna, because she can't be a shard. During all of this, Okoye has resurfaced, and he has gone to Winston and been like, I haven't fed on anyone since I came back. I'm here to help you deal with the three angels, or as they're actually called, the Vectors. They are also soul eaters, but they are not just normal Okoye level soul eaters. They are the three big, all-powerful beings. And we learn that their plan is to open a rift between our universe and theirs, because the events of Book 2 led Okoye to flee into that universe, bringing with him destruction. And now, in order to save all of those people in that universe, the Vectors are trying basically bringing them over to Earth. So he's like, they are my enemy too. We need to stop them. We need everyone there. We need everyone together. And Dylan shows up and he listens to this and he's like, he doesn't want to agree, but he understands that this is unfortunately the thing that has to be done. They have to be involved. They have to fight. This is what they're there for. And it's like, well, we can't do it anyway. Tori's gone. She's been spread out of the wind. And it's like, and Dylan looks at Michael and he's like, actually, I think we can. And what ends up happening is they create this big, giant windstorm and gather all of the dust basically in Texas, because that's where she was spread out over. And Dylan uses his pattern recognition to pick out which pieces of the stuff is actually her ash, and Winston rebuilds her bones and those different pieces, and they manage over the course of 2 hours to rebuild Tori from scratch, which is honestly one of the coolest things in the book. It's actually super cool. And bring her back, and they end up finding out that they have this weird, it's called, basically, they're all part of one soul, there's certain ways that they're all supposed to connect. And that when they're all together, they resonate, especially now that they're all super empowered. So it's like they all know that together this is what they should be doing, and that they still have to get Loudries, and they still have to get Deanna somehow. And they're like, Okoye, can you open a portal and we can bring her through? And Okoye's like, yeah, I'll do that if you give me 1,000 souls. I need power. I don't have any power. I've been starving myself because that's what you demanded of me. That's what I knew you needed of me. So I will But if you want me to do this, if you want me to bring Deanna back, I will need at least 1,000 souls. And Dylan's like, not happening. Nope. They are then attacked and captured, and Dylan wakes up back in the prison seat, looking at Maddie. And she's like, I'm sorry, we had to do this. We had to. And he's like, no, this is just what you wanted. You wanted me to be in need of you. But he's also, it's like really weird, because Dylan reacts weirdly in certain parts of this. Like, because he should be, like, I think he should be pissed the way it's written, the way I'm super pissed from reading this part, but it's like, this is such a betrayal. And he's just kind of aloof about it, and it's like, eh. And it turns out, like, Tessic planned all this, and Dylan's like, I thought I could leave at any time. He's like, yeah, but you still have a job to do, and I'm not gonna let you leave until that's done. And it's like, well, what job do you have? And it's like, and he breaks it down, and it's like, we're gonna undo the worst crime of all century. We're gonna do one of the worst events of all history. And that event is, of course, the Holocaust. Okay, I'm gonna pause right here for a second. I'll tell more of the story later. This part of the book pisses me off. I hate this. Because I understand this is a tragic event, and having someone who can bring the dead back to life and can undo a tragic event, I can understand that. If this was set in the 1940s or the 1950s. But it's the 2000s. This book isn't that old. And these people have been dead for at least 60 years. So it's like we need to put their souls at rest. It's like, their souls are at rest. They've been dead 60 years. We don't need to bring them back. And they even mentioned in the book, I thought you were gonna say 9/11. And it turned out you had a bigger plan. I'm like, at least 9/11, those people's families are still alive, mostly. You want to bring back these people who've been dead for 60 years. What's next? Are we going to bring back all the people killed by Attila the Hun? Are we going to right the wrongs committed by Julius Caesar? It's a horrible event. I'm not going to deny that. But it happened. The fact that it did happen is important. It changed the world. The way things are done, the way the world looks at certain things. Without this atrocity, the world isn't the way we know it. And going back and changing that doesn't undo that. Or it can. But it changes it for the people that were involved, but the people that were involved were dead. So this entire thing royally pissed me off. Yeah, it was just ridiculous. But, of course, eventually, Dylan agrees to it. On the chance, basically, it's like, they all agree to do it, and they all do it the first one. And it takes several hours, but they managed to bring back the first site, which was the smaller of the sites, but had 800 souls, give or take. Dylan agrees to keep doing this, but requires that Tori and Michaels be sent to go and bring Loudries in, because they need her back in, and they're the only ones who might have the chance to do it. And Tessic agrees. Tori and Michael have this very strong connection, both from when they died together and having been a year behind, but also because when they do the forming, when they all combine into one, that each of them touches another person in the group specifically in a certain way. Like, everyone is connected to Dylan, but also certain people are connected to others. And it explains a little bit why Michael couldn't connect to Loudries the way she wanted, because he doesn't connect to her that way. He connects to Tori that way, and him and Tori end up developing a relationship and kind of have sex. It's thing where it's like it's soft. It's more of a connection of the heart than it is a sexual thing. Anyway, they are sent to go convince Loudries to come in, and they fail, and they're taken prisoner. So they end up in Auschwitz, and Winston and Dylan go in, and they are just both overcome with the sense of death and darkness, and just is crushing down on them. And they know that they have to get through this, they have to survive this. And what ends up happening is that their aura fields end up shrinking and being contained within themselves. So, finally, after 3 books, they've learned to control their power. And they both turn and leave, and Tissik's like, and they're like, we're done. And Tissik's like, what are you talking about? They're not, where are the, you're supposed to bring back the people. And Dylan's like, it's like, they're gone, let them rest. Which, yeah, exactly. And Tissik's like, no, you have to do this, you have to. And Dylan does his little Jedi mind trick thing, and it's like, it's not your weight to bear type of thing, and it's just, and Tissik's like, and releases, and is fine, and gives them a lift to Greece, where the Vectors and Loudries are, with Michael and Tori. And Maddie goes off with one of the pilots, who, during these events, the old man Vector did something that the young kid who was the leader, Vector, didn't like, and so he killed the old man. But the Vector didn't die, the body just died, so he's transferred his soul into someone else. And now they've been building up Loudrie's power over and again, trying to get her to be able to control hundreds and hundreds of people. But she's unable to do it on her own. But Michael and Tori show her the power of the sinking. And she realizes, if I have that, if I use these two, I can control enough people to do the job that you guys have been asking me to do. So she agrees and gets all these people to form around the island of Crete, which has its best specific doorway that'll lead to the other side, and leads all the people there, and then slowly releases all the control of them. So they're all stuck there, they can't leave, and that's basically the offering. So Dylan and Winston make it onto the island, and basically they're undetectable now a little bit, because their power is now held inside themselves instead of producing the aura. So the Vectors are less able to detect them. And Dylan goes to talk to Loudries, who is now on her own, isn't surrounded by that Vectors, because they're all getting ready for the ceremony in the morning, and he goes and talks to her, and she's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing it. I have no interest. Like, I've sided with the bad guys. Basically, I let their people through, and I get to live. And Dylan's like, that's not true. And she's like, yeah, I do. Basically, Dylan's like, it's like, they're on the wrong side. you never fully sided with them. And she's like, how do you know that? It's like, did you ever let them feed you souls like we did with Okoye? And she's like, no. It's like, I know you still have it in you. And he uses the mind thing, but we don't 100% know if it's going to work or not. It just says, it's like, you were always the weakest of us. And walks away. But Michael and Tori managed to escape, and Winston gets attacked by one of the Vectors and beats the crap out of him, and he nearly dies, but manages to survive by flinging himself into the ocean, but gets rescued. The Vectors are like, we're not worried about any of these people, especially Dylan, because we have something to fight them off with, and we got something that he wants that he won't attack us with, and that, of course, is Maddie, because one of the Vectors was controlling her helicopter pilot. So Maddie is in a situation where she knows, basically, she knows what they're trying to use her for. They know if the Vectors succeed, that this will be out of the world, that she knows that she has to take herself out of the equation. And Okoye happens to be there, and she's met Okoye. She knows what he is. And she runs into him, and she's like, take it. I give you permission. And Okoye swallows her soul. And Dylan is rightfully pissed about this. And like, I'm going to kill you. And Maddie is like, even without her soul, there's still like the hint of the person in there and this. And she's like, I did this. It's my choice. Go do your job. You know what you need to do. And Okoye is to open up a sliver of the universe into the Parasite's universe. And he's like, I can't hold this for long. And Dylan's like, what am I supposed to do? And he's like, and Okoye's like, call to her. And Deanna's body has been left there. But her soul is still conscious, and she hears the call. And manages to escape the parasite dimension and ends up fusing with Maddie's body. And they chose to do something interesting with this, which I was surprised, in that it's not Deanna's personality that takes over, it's actually Maddie's. So she has all of Maddie's memory. And Dylan's like, Deanna, and she's like, no, Maddie. And she really sort of figures out, like, there's something wrong, this isn't 100% correct. I can sort of sense this other person here. And decides that I shouldn't go looking for Deanna in here, because that would be besmirchful for the person whose body I am inhabiting. It would be bad, because Maddie deserves that level of respect. So now they have 5 of the shards and are able to fight against the Vectors. And I will leave it there. So, my thoughts on the series overall. Overall, extremely good. Actually, very easy reads. I read through the first one. I read through the first one in a single day. It's fast, easy read. The characters are all somewhat unique. They all have certain stuff that's interesting about them, and then there are certain ones that just kind of fade away. Like Dylan and Winston and Michael are all really easy to classify, and even Loudry's is easy to classify. Tori tends to blend a little too much into the background. Like, it doesn't help that her power is I'll have to go second weakest, because I think Deanna's power is probably the weakest, because the ability to instill unwavering faith, while good when you're leading an army, isn't necessarily the most interesting power. And there were stuff that the cleanliness that they expand upon that made it more interesting. But, yeah. It does a really good job of setting up villains. It does a good job of setting up realistic ways that they solve these. I think like the first book has one of the weaker villains, because there's a villain I didn't even talk about, who is the person that Dylan plans to use to destroy the world. And the reason I didn't talk about him is because in the end he's completely unimportant. It's like he's defeated off screen by a character with no conscience. So it's basically killed by one of the crazy people. So it's like it's all kind of pointless in the long run for that. But the parasites were really good, interesting villains in that they would abandon the bodies. Although the level of how easy it was for how hard it was to get rid of the first 4, and how easy it was to get rid of the second 2 was a little hard to say. Of the 3 books, I'm gonna say the third book was the best. It had the most going for it. Had the most life to it, and it helped that it was the longest and had a lot of stuff going on. Even with that stuff that I can stand about it, it still was the best. I think the weakest is the second book. I think that just that middle part gets a little too muddled, and and the characters just bashing heads against each other doesn't work for me. But yeah, it has moments that work well, especially the ending of that book really well. Like, I liked the characters, I liked the story, I liked the way it was told. Mostly. There is one little thing that I noticed with Shusterman that I don't particularly love, which is that he has this habit where at the start of new arcs, because he'll write like 4 chapters and have that be an arc. At the start of new arcs, he will write an entire chapter almost to a character who is usually or almost always not important. It's just someone on the outside looking in. And, like, in this one, it sort of works, because there are times where that happens where it's kind of nice to see a normal human's perspective reaction to the amazing things that the shards are doing. Whereas, like, in Unwind, it drove me nuts, because it would just throw you out of the action, or throw you out of the story. It's like, here's a random story about a woman dropping off her baby, so we can explain that this is what happened. It's like, you couldn't explain that in story. I had to hear about a random woman who's never seen or heard from again. And that's sort of what happens in this, is there's a bunch of times where there's like, here's a random human being reacting to a situation that you will never hear from again. Okay. Otherwise, he's a good, strong, solid writer. Like, the way it's written, it's such an easy read. It's such a relaxing read, but also has that compelling effort that makes you want to keep reading. I liked most of the characters. I mean, I like all the characters. They all have their own little thing that's kind of interesting. And I like a lot of the side characters, some of the stuff that was just going on, like just the idea. I like Loudry's when in the first book. I just loved that idea of someone being so heavy that they created their own gravity. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. Like, I understand that from planet size. I get that, but as a human being having that ability, that sounds interesting. Which, in the first book, when they lost their powers and gained the other powers, a couple of them, I'm like, wow, you got a exchange for that. Like, you lost the ability to create your own gravity, but you gain the ability to just manipulate people. Like, yeah. And the weird thing, in the long run, like, Michael's power, is the most normal of the, like, if you're gonna give someone superpowers, weather control is, like, the most normal. It's the one that makes the least sense, based on the idea that they are a cure. That they are, because one of the things that's talks about in the third book is that the idea that they are a universal antibody. That they are the universe's way of fighting infection and disease. And, like, okay, well, the cleanliness, a lot of that, like, it all, and the way they all form together in the end works well, and it does end up making sense. It's just the weather control side of that is just the most, like, how would controlling the weather help you heal people or things? I don't know. But overall, I recommend it. I'm super happy I read it. I'm super happy that Mom Duda gave me the first book, and that I read and I do I honestly I'm glad to have gotten to read them. They're interesting, good, unique superhero stories. The only real negative I would have for it besides that Holocaust thing that I couldn't stand is the fact that the ending is just kind of abrupt. It's like it's just one of those, where are they now? But you don't get a real description of where everyone is. You just get a single line. Like, what happened to Loudre's? It's just like, what happened to her? It's like, she's in a small town working as a waitress. And that's all we know. I'm like, really? You can't give us better details? Honestly, and it's a little abrupt. But overall, yeah, I would give the first book a 5. I give the second book 4. I give it a 4.5, and I give the final book a 5. While the Holocaust thing bothers me, I can completely understand the character wanting to do that. It's just, if you really think about it, it's one of those things that's like, it's like, where do you draw the line of people you need to bring back? Because especially since the end of the second book was him being full on, we shouldn't bring people back from the dead because it ruins the necessity of life. So you have to, death has to have meaning. If you take that away, then life doesn't have meaning. And it's like, okay, that makes sense. And that's the end of the second book. What's the thing that the third book's middle plot is all about? Let's bring more people back from the dead. And it's pitched to you in the way of, once you hear this, once I tell you the plan, you will 100% agree with me and you'll know there's no other option. And I'm like, the second he said the plan, I went, I 100% disagree. There are multiple other options. So, one major flaw. But otherwise, good series. Highly recommended. Till next time.